we're going to go over a few different types of cardio, talk about heart rate zones, and also potentially which is the best form of cardio for yourself. So I wanted to start this off with a question of what makes something cardio? Like what makes, let's see, I have this USB drive here. What makes it not cardio that I'm just picking this up and holding it, right? What makes an activity cardio? And typically when we talk about cardio, it's something that's low fatigue, but also will get your heart rate up. So it's something that also needs to be very repeatable, usually something for at least 10 plus minutes. With that said though, there are other forms of cardiovascular exercise that won't be quite as long, but when we usually think of a typical cardio, it's going to be low fatiguing. And when I say low fatiguing, this might be confusing. You're thinking like, okay, just going to bed, going to sleep, that's low fatiguing, that's cardio. No. It's a low fatiguing, repeatable activity. So something like very light jogging or brisk walking for most people. That's extremely low fatiguing. Maybe it doesn't seem like it at the time, but comparatively to if you went out for a run is extremely fatiguing on your body and cardiovascular system. So that's kind of a brief nutshell of what I think would make something cardio. And bleeding into that, we can also then go into the varying levels of cardio. So believe it or not, just like when you go to the gym and you have your heaviest set, you're doing like a 1 rep max of a lift or just something you can only do for one time. It's also kind of the same thing for cardio. There's different zones that you can actually work in when it comes to cardio. So usually we start with zone 1. That's just very light cardio. So that'd be about 50 to 60% of your heart rate max. And I'll actually talk a little bit about heart rate max in a second. Zone 2, a little bit lighter, 60 to 70%. And then it keeps going up and up all the way up until zone 5 cardio is 90 to 100%. So this is really easy to remember. Just zone 1 cardio is 50 to 60% of your heart rate max. Zone 5 is 90 to 100%, so it just jumps 10% for every single zone. And there are unique benefits to each one of these zones if you actually train with them. I just mentioned heart rate max, kind of what that is. So let's talk about heart rate max. Heart rate max is, of course, how hard your heart can beat when it's literally at its capacity. It's doing everything it can. And what does that really mean? Or how do we get to that? So usually kind of the good rule of thumb is to do 220 minus your age. This gives you a good general ballpark, but I will say with this, there's a huge asterisk caveat that this is not necessarily 100% correct. There are some people who are just genetic anomalies. They have a really high max heart rate. There's some people who have a really low max heart rate. It's going to very distinctly be different based off of individuals. So this is a good rule of thumb. Kind of a gold standard to actually find your max heart rate would be to do a VO2 max test, which is extremely painful and difficult. So not a lot of people want to do that. You'll like hook up to a heart rate monitor. You'll have all these things going on. But I understand that's not particularly the most pleasant thing to do and what most people would even want to do, right? So for the most part, start with 220 minus your age when looking at these different levels that you can work within and just kind of work it a bit. You might notice that, oh, I'm doing my quote unquote maximum heart rate. I might be doing my zone 5 training, which is 90 to 100% of your maximum heart rate. And you don't even feel tired. Okay, if that's the case, maybe your maximum heart rate is a little bit higher. So kind of something to play with a little bit. Let's talk about kind of some of the different benefits of working at those different types of levels. So 50 to 60%, this is very light. You're going to get a little bit of cardiovascular benefit, but this is going to be kind of more in your general movement category, so just general physical activity. Once you start getting into the zone 2 to zone 3, that's a 60 to 80% category. you're going to start to build some cardiovascular stamina, some local muscular endurance as well. And then once you go into those kind of harder levels, we might even be talking about our anaerobic capacity, which we'll talk about in a second, which is the ability to do a exercise basically as hard as you can without oxygen for a little bit. So that's what anaerobic means. Aerobic means with oxygen, anaerobic means without oxygen. When you're reaching your quote unquote maximum heart rate zones, you're going to be getting to a point where you've reached what's called anaerobic threshold or anaerobic capacity, where your body can't cycle through all those nutrients, can't cycle through, let's say we needed to take an oxygen, get out CO2. Your body and the tissues aren't able to keep up well enough to be able to continue that maximum zone 5 output. So essentially where I'm getting at with all this is that is more of an anaerobic activity. So it's still going to improve your heart health, but it's in a more maximal level, which is a key thing I want to note here. There are benefits from all of these. So you should be doing some lighter stuff to help with joint integrity, joint health. You should be doing some middle of the road stuff to build your endurance capacity a little bit. And then you should also be challenging your heart rate and getting really up to that kind of anaerobic threshold or anaerobic capacity level, because that's how you build a well-rounded heart. Just like you build a well-rounded body, which we'll talk about in resistance training in a second, you're kind of trying to do the same thing with your heart as well. Let's go over some different types of cardio. And so we just talked about intensities, but we can also talk about different types too. I kind of segmented these into higher impact categories and lower impact. So if you're somebody who is younger or somebody who's done a lot of high impact activity, as we'll discuss in a second, over your life, these may be pretty easy for you to actually kind of adhere to and keep working with. But if you're somebody who's a little bit older, or you have joint pain, or you're just not comfortable doing super high impact stuff, we have some lower impact options as well. We mentioned what actually kind of defines cardio, of what makes something cardio. These will all be definitions of that. So let's begin. Higher impact options, I have running, jumping rope, fast walking. I would even sort of say sprinting, but that's more the anaerobic capacity. So we're thinking about, again, these are cyclical things that are repeatable, for the most part low fatigue. If you're in general decent shape, you can go out for a run and it's not going to totally wreck you for 10 plus minutes. If you're really out of shape, probably will, but that's kind of at your own relative level. But the difference is these are really high impact, which means we have a lot of landing force, a lot of eccentric load. That means the muscle is lengthening. So when you hit something and it's absorbing it, that's kind of that eccentric. When it comes to fast walking and running, large eccentric load, that's what make it high impact. We also have lower impact forms of cardio, being swimming, walking, biking, rowing. I added circuit training in here. That could be doing some light dumbbell or kettlebell movements, maybe some body weight movements, but doing multiple repetitions, going to another one and kind of working that in. It's almost like cardio plus weights. I really like doing that. In addition to that, we have the stair stepper, elliptical, spin bicycles. Those are all lower impact activities because they don't involve absorbing loads. And depending on who you are, again, you might want to do something more higher impact, especially if you just want to challenge yourself, you'd like it better, that could be you. But also, if you are somebody who's trying to improve your bone mineral density, that's a huge key to have higher impact stuff. With that said, all of these are good. Do what you really, really want to enjoy, and we'll kind of talk about some best practices in a second. But I wanted to finish with kind of this last little section on the different types. Again, we're going to talk about intensities, but this is more along the lines of where are we actually getting our energy from versus just your heart rate max. So when we're talking about steady state cardio, this is kind of that zone 1, 2, maybe into zone 3 training. So roughly 50 to it'd be 70-ish%, 70, maybe 80%. I'd say more towards 70% of your heart rate max. Heart rate max again, 220 minus your age. Steady state cardio, so in that 50 to 70% range, is going to be what we're calling the oxidative pathway. Oxidative phosphorylation is the exact term, but basically this is, as we talked about, your body's ability to take oxygen from the outside, send it to the cell, send it to the tissues it needs, and then take out all of the waste product and then recycle that. So if you're in a steady state where basically the byproducts aren't building up too quickly, you're able to use this oxidative pathway to keep going. It's just something to kind of note when we're talking about working these different aspects of fitness. So that's kind of the steady state oxidative pathway. Also, in about a 60 to 90 second of hard work range, this is more of your glycolytic pathway. So it's when your body's tapping into the stored muscle glycogen directly in the muscle cells. And glycogen, if you're unaware, is essentially stored carbohydrate. So carbohydrate, when breaking down, gets stored as glycogen into our muscle cells, our liver, and a few different places. But you're actually taking some of the glycogen in your muscle, liver, etc., and using that to fuel that exercise. With that said, this is great because you can perform at a higher intensity, but it doesn't last nearly as long. Your glycogen, especially when using this glycolytic pathway, will actually decrease pretty quickly. Again, roughly 60 to 90 seconds if you're doing a hard work bout. That means you know you're at about that range. Max effort, this is where we would be doing kind of in that anaerobic threshold we talked about earlier. So phosphogenic, this is basically sprinting, and phosphogenic and max effort stuff, I want you to think about going hand in hand with your anaerobic ability. Again, so without oxygen. Phosphagen is an extremely quick fuel source. You can tap into it almost immediately to get going, boom, and you can use it fast. But it dies out quick, sometimes 10 to 15 seconds. So your body cannot use it very long. When we're thinking about ATP, the phosphogenic system uses a good amount of this right away, but it does not last. So that's kind of just generally cardio, different levels, different types of cardio, and which of them is best for you. Any of them work. I'd highly recommend all of them. Try to incorporate some steady state, some 60 to 90 second harder workouts, and also some max effort stuff where you literally are going so fast that you can only last about 10 seconds and then you have to relax. All of those are good and will give you a good, well-rounded base for your heart health. Something I want to say too when it comes to fat loss, some do burn more calories, especially full body ones. So something like rowing burns a lot of calories, running burns a lot of calories because there's a large eccentric load and you can move a little bit quicker. Also too, if you are not proficient at an exercise, say you are worse at running or worse at swimming, you're going to burn more calories during that activity because you essentially are not used to the movement. If you're not as proficient or good at the movement, it's going to take more energy to do the same movement versus somebody who's just gliding. You know, that person you envy who can just run a mile without ease. Their proficiency is a little bit better, so they're likely going to be able to run better. Also too, what is comfortable for you? If you like lower impact stuff, maybe stick towards that more. What are your goals? Of course, if you just want general well-rounded health, doing all of these and any of these forms